Okay, good afternoon, everybody. You should have received my PowerPoint presentation already. It's 26 pages long. I am probably one of the unusual presenters where I give you my PowerPoint presentation before the class starts as opposed to sending it out afterwards. And the reason why I do that is you can follow along. Hopefully you've printed it out or you have some electronic means of making notes on it, but to make your own personal notes on there and jot down any questions that you might want to ask. And then you can always use this presentation as a reference document in the future. The introduction on myself: I'm a retired contracting officer with the Department of Defense, 29 years. Most of my experience is with construction, architect engineering, supplies, ship repair, and service contracts, both pre-award and post-award. I've also held every position locally in the government-wide purchase card program, which you would know as a Visa or a MasterCard to get paid on your invoices. I started work with the local PTAC office the day after I retired, and so I'm going on my 5th year now with PTAC as a counselor. This class, is provided to prepare you for your discussions with federal agencies' representatives or their prime contractors. I will provide you with key terms, vocabulary, lexicon, whatever you want to call it, in order to have understandable communication between you and the other party. Communicating with understanding is a beautiful thing. And that's why I put this class together, to help you speak the language with federal contracting representatives, whether it's the agency or the large business prime contractor. So these terms are used in federal contracting, and some may be used in state and local governments also. There are some similarities, but not all. At the end of the presentation, there will be time for questions. You may hear, well, we're going to talk about, in my screen with the agenda, talk about at the end. I also have a listing of questions that you're going to hear from federal agencies and large business contractors in the process of vetting you. These are questions they will find out from you if you're a good fit for them. So we're going to review some of those also. I'm sure you'll have some questions on that. So I want you to jot down other words or terms that I have not presented and discussed today in the class, and I will address them at the end of the class during our question and answer time. I will take some time throughout the class, pause. If you got any questions, we'll get caught up with that, or you can save them for the end. There's a lot of the terms. I mean, the whole class is pretty much terms, acronyms, abbreviations, and whatnot. So save your questions probably for the end, because I may be covering it during the course of the class. So before we get started, does anybody have any questions? As Leslie said, this is being recorded. It will be on YouTube. It will be on our Washington PTAC website, and you can always reference in the future. But other than that, does anybody have any questions, administrative or other?
I don't see any, Terry. So
okay, we had 46 people sign up for this class. We'll see how many actually are able to show up. Okay, so there's the second one. It's all about lingo. Let's talk the lingo so both parties understand each other. Communication is a wonderful thing. Next page. So our agenda for today, we're going to have general contracting terms and terms that you would experience in the pre-award phase, which is the solicitation phase. And we're going to talk about terms in post-award, which is after the contract is awarded, terms and abbreviations that you'll encounter. We'll have a quiz towards the end to see how well you retained what I've given you. We'll talk about commonly asked questions, what the federal agencies representatives or large business prime contractors will be asking you when you contact them to vet you. if there's a good fit, they'll put you on their list to be a subcontractor. And then we'll have a Q&A period at the end, followed by a summary and some other useful information. Next. All right, starting out, federal contracting terms. NAICS. So the federal government uses NAICS codes, North American Industrial Classification Code, a code for each of the industries, where the state of Washington uses commodity codes and commercial industry uses keywords. So when, for example, you're building your capability statement for a federal agency, you're going to be using NAICS codes. If you're building your capability statement to get to Washington state agencies, you're going to use commodity codes. And if you've got a capability statement because you want to work in the private industry, commercial accounts, well, that's a different capability statement altogether, and it uses keywords. So you got to know your targeted audience, use the correct way for searching for jobs. Federal government, it's NAICS codes. SAM is the System for Award Management. I provide the website there. If you want to be a prime contractor for any federal agency, you need to be registered in SAM, the System for Award Management. Not so if you want to be a subcontractor, but if you want to be a subcontractor, you still need to get the next one, which is a UEI, a Unique Entity Identifier. So when you go into sam.gov, you have a choice of how you want to register. The first choice is just to get a UEI, be a subcontractor. But if you want to be a prime contractor, go for the award of a contract. You're going to select the second one, for which it will give you a UEI. But at the end of that process, it will also give you a CAGE code. And that's next on the list there. It's Commercial and Government Entity Code. It's a 5 alphanumeric code. I had a client a few months ago. It was the first time I met with him. He was all excited. He said, I got registered in SAM. I said, oh, wonderful. And what's your CAGE code? And he said, what's that? He didn't have his CAGE code. I said, if you didn't get your CAGE code, you're not registered yet in SAM. Okay. That is the last step. So after you hit the enter button, after filling out all those screens to get your company registered in SAM, then it's about 7 to 10 days later, you'll get an electronic message assigning you a CAGE code. When you get that, you are registered. And don't forget to renew your registration every 12 months, because if you let it lapse, it's going to be difficult to get that renewed. It's a process. Okay. The last one there is GPC, the government-wide purchase card. That's beneficial for you if you can get paid with a Visa or a MasterCard, because when you submit that invoice to the contracting officer and he's willing to pay you with a bank card, you get paid the next day. The other method is you have to submit an invoice to the agency's website that processes invoice. And for example, if you have a service contract and you submit a monthly invoice, you get paid 30 days later. Okay. If you're a construction contractor and you're doing a progress request for a payment, you get paid in 14 days. Your last invoice gets paid in 30 days. So you can see the advantage. There's a time value to money. And if you're short on funds, then you probably want to get paid with a bank card, although there's fees associated with that. Okay. It pays to shop around for bank card, Visa, MasterCard. I tell clients that they're not hard over on opening up a bank card transaction account with their bank, then shop around, do the market research. You'd be surprised at the differences that different financial institutions charge you for processing credit card transactions. So I say, at a minimum, call a credit union, call a state bank, and call a national bank. It's fascinating in the questions that they ask you, but some of them is, how many transactions a month are you going to do? How many dollars a month are you going to do? So it just depends on your business, which is the best fit for you, those financial institutions, for getting a bank, being able to process bank cards for your invoices. Okay. Next question, next slide. All right, federal contracting terms. Oh, we just did that one. Solicitation notice terms. All right, so during the solicitation phase, we have all kinds of terminology that we use. So the first bullet there talks about, or all of these are different types of notices that you would find in sam.gov. Once you're in sam.gov, on the right-hand side is where you submitted your application to get an account in SAM, but over on the left-hand side are 7 icons, and the top left one is called contract opportunities. That's where you find notices. And I use the word notice as opposed to solicitation. Solicitation is just one type of notice that's available in contract opportunities. So what I've done in this slide is identified some of the more important ones for you. There are many more notices than these, but these are the key ones that you can appreciate and that you would want to be looking for. The first bullet, you don't see very often, but I'm just going to put it out there and let you know about it. RFIs, RFPs, statements of work. So a RFI is a request for information. Could be a draft or a request for proposal, or it could be a draft statement of work. What the agency is doing generally, most times, is that they've got a new requirement in their agency that they've never purchased before. So they are asking your help because you're the experts in your industry with current technology and methods, terminology, and whatnot. The agency is asking for your help in developing their request, their statement of work, or they're putting a proposal together and they're asking for your input on their draft proposal, draft request for proposal. So you don't see those very often. They buy something new and they may ask for your help in developing that statement of work. Now, of the rest of these, or even all of these on this page, I believe the second bullet is the most important for you, especially if you are a small business, and very especially if you have any socioeconomic certification, like woman-owned small business, service disabled veteran small business, hub zone small business, or you are a contractor in the SBA's 8A program. So those are 4 formal certifications that you have to apply for with the SBA. If you have those, or even if you don't and you're just a small business, you absolutely want to respond to a sources sought notice. I issued many of those in my career. A sources sought notice is the agency's contracting officer performing market research. They are looking for small businesses. The Federal Acquisition Regulation states that all procurements will be set aside for small business. The issue is, or as a result of that, the agency's contracting officer is required to go out and do market research and find small businesses. When they can't find a sufficient number of small businesses, and the regulation says 2, when I did it, I tried to get 3 for a different reason. And if you can't, and if I as the agency contracting officer could not find a sufficient number of small businesses, then I would advertise my requirement as full and open competition. That means any company can apply for the award of the contract. So what you want to do if you're a small business, and especially if you have a socioeconomic certification, is you want to respond to a sources sought notice. And the reason for that is it helps you eliminate competition. What do I mean by that? So the example that I give, if I am the agency's contracting officer, I issue a sources sought, it's due in 10 days. A sources sought typically has 3 parts, if not 4 parts to it. The first part is a synopsis of the requirement that I want to solicit and contract for, followed by a number of questions that I want you to tell me about your company, followed by the due date for your response to the sources sought. Typically, they're out there for 10 days, so it's a short turnaround. When I wrote the sources sought, I put a 2-page limit on it. So you're not having to write volumes of pages. For mine, it was only 2 pages. If you gave me more than 2 pages, I probably threw away page 3 and 4 because I only asked for 2. Okay. And so when I would issue a source of thought, I would get the responses. And after that cutoff date, then I would print them out and I would stack them on my desk. Okay, I got 1 from a small business. I got 1 from a service disabled veteran-owned small business. And I got 3 from hub zones. And I got 1 8A. Well, okay, so I didn't get enough from those other socioeconomic certifications, but I got 3 from hub zone companies. Okay, so now I'm going to look through these. I might go so far as to call you, contact you, and ask you some follow-up questions. Do you have the capacity? Just confirming. Do you have the capacity? Do you have the capability? Do you have the interest? Yes, yes, yes. Okay, I've got 3 companies. Now I'm going to send off my request. It's called a small business coordination record to the Small Business Administration for their approval. If they stamp it approved, they send it back to me. I've now put my solicitation together. And on that first page, I say 100% set aside for hub zone small business box. And what that means now is that this procurement can only be competed amongst hub zone small business certified companies. See, you've eliminated competition. No women-owned small businesses, no veteran-owned small businesses, no large businesses, no other small businesses, only hub zone small business certified companies. That's why it's so important, I believe, for you is to respond to those sources sought notices because it eliminates your competition. Don't you think you have a better chance if you have fewer people, fewer companies to compete with? Absolutely. Okay. So the next one is a pre-solicitation notice. All that's saying is, no kidding, we are going to issue a solicitation on or about 45 days from now. I had a client a couple of months ago, got all excited. He got this notice. He says, Terry, what do I do with this notice? It's a pre-solicitation notice. How do I respond? And I said, you don't. It's a pre-solicitation notice. They're just telling you it's coming. Okay. And the next one is the actual solicitation. Okay. So an actual solicitation can appear in a number of different forms. The first one is an RFQ, or at least the way I've got it here. RFQ, RFP, and IFB. Those are the biggies. So an RFQ is a request for quotation. That's under FAR Part 13, Simplified Acquisition Procedures. Those are requirements where the government has estimated the value to be less than the simplified acquisition threshold, which is currently $250,000. So when they have small procurements, they can do a simplified method of soliciting the requirement. And so those are RFQs, requests for quotation. So they're asking you for a quotation. The next one is for large purchases, typically over $250,000, and those are called requests for proposals. Those are negotiated, typically large purchase. There's a lot more that you have to put together normally to compete for the award of that contract. So typically in an RFP, there's usually 3 components of your proposal. The first one being a cover letter, the second one being your price proposal, and the third one being your technical proposal. Okay, so I have a whole nother class that talks about putting proposals together. And the third one there is the IFB, invitation for bid. This is under the realm of sealed bidding. There are agencies that still do it. My agency quit doing it after 2001, the attack on the buildings in New York City, because our contracting office had to move from off base to on base for security purposes. So as soon as that happened, we no longer did sealed bidding. The reason for that is because sealed bidding requires an invitation to the general public to come in when the contracting officer is opening up each bid and announcing the name of the company, their price, so on and so forth. And at the end of opening all the bids, the contracting officer announces the apparent winner. It's a public opening. If you're off base, if you're on base, how do you get a pass and a badge to get on base to attend a bid opening? Very difficult. So on my agency, which was with the Navy, we quit doing sealed bidding because we were now on base. People couldn't get on base for that bid opening. But there are a lot of agencies, especially the civilian agencies, that still do sealed bidding. Okay, and that comes under FAR Part 14. 14 is for sealed bidding. 15 is for negotiated procurements, and 13 is for simplified acquisition procedures. Now, the last notice I have on this list here is award notices. This is really an important notice if you want to be a subcontractor. The reason for that is the federal agencies, when they award a contract, they also have to post a notice of award of the contract, identifying who won it, how much. And different agencies may provide additional information like their address, period of performance, what kind of money was used to award the contract. This is a great opportunity if you want to be a subcontractor, because now you can find these award notices. This contract was awarded today. It was awarded to so and so, and you then, if the contact information isn't in the notice, you can go to the internet, go look up that company name, get their phone number, email address, whatever, and contact them and say, hey, I'm out here. I'm available. I see you just got awarded a contract for umpty-ump at such and such a place. I just want to let you know that I'm available for subcontracting opportunities, and I have a capability statement that I can send to you. So that's how you can find subcontracting opportunities. That's just one way of many. Okay. Let's do a little pause here for any questions before we move on to the next page. Any questions so far on this page or the previous pages? Okay. Let's move on to the next page. Solicitation and contracting terms. The next page, there we go. Solicitation and contracting terms. So these are some common terms that you'll hear. The first one I have there is PPIs, pre-proposal inquiry. Some different agencies will call it different things, but they all mean the same thing. This is your opportunity to submit one or more questions to the contracting officer or the contract specialist about a question you have that you found in the solicitation. Very important. And as a result, the contracting officer may do the second thing. It's an amendment. So as a result of you submitting a question, the contracting officer determines, oh, I made a mistake in my solicitation. I need to correct that. They do it with an amendment. It's typically done on a standard form 30. It's a written change to the solicitation called an amendment. Okay. Evaluations. So when you decide that you're going to pursue the award of a contract for this solicitation, you are going to put a proposal together and submit it to the contracting officer by whatever means that the contracting officer put in the solicitation. It could be via email, could be overnight mail, could be US mail. It maybe has to be hand delivered. You've got to follow the instructions in order to be in compliance with the solicitation. So evaluations, that's on the contracting officer. They have now received your proposal, many proposals, hopefully, on the government side. For you, the fewer the better. For the government side, the more the better. And they are going to go through the process of evaluations. They are evaluating every quote, bid, proposal to make a determination who the successful awardee will be. And then they will make the award. The award goes to the successful offer. That's the winner of the contract. Debrief, very important. On federal federal contracts, you can ask for a debrief. And typically what the contracting officer will do when they make the notice of award, and what I said earlier in the earlier slide, is that they are required to put a notice in SAM.gov under contract opportunities, the award notice. At the same time, they are sending out a notification, be it either email or US mail, to the unsuccessful offerers. Those are the companies who competed for the award but did not win the award. And in that communication, there's typically a paragraph in that letter that says, if you would like a debrief, you must contact me within 3 days of receipt of this letter and tell me who is going to participate from your company in the debrief. And then the contracting officer will contact you and set up a day and a time for the debrief. It can be conducted in any number of ways, depending on where you're located, depending on the agency, depending on the contracting officer. They can be by phone, they can be in person, they could be on Zoom like this. They could be in writing, where you submit your questions and they provide answers. So it can be done in any number of ways. But what is really important about a debrief, and if you're the winner of the contract or you are the unsuccessful offer in the contract, you should always ask for a debrief. What it does is the contracting officer, the agency's contracting officer, is to tell you how they evaluated your proposal, your strengths, your weaknesses, where you were ranked, because the award notice says who won, gives the price. You know your price, but you don't know if you were number 2 or if you were number 29. You find that out in a debrief. Okay, wouldn't that be interesting to know that you came in number 2, you were really close, or there were 10 companies in between you and the winner? You don't know that until you ask for a debrief. Okay, now on the federal contracting, the Federal Acquisition Regulation, Part 15, I think is 0.506, says what the agency is required to tell you in a debrief, and it also says what they are not allowed to tell you in a debrief. So that's completely different than the state of Washington. The state of Washington tells you everything. They tell you the names of the companies that competed for it. They tell you the price from every company that they got a proposal from. They just spill the beans on everything. Not so in federal contracting. Federal contracting, you ask for a debrief, you get an evaluation. You are told how the agency evaluated your proposal, nobody else's. Okay. But what this does for you is, for the next time you put a proposal together, you can sharpen your pencil and do better in these different factors that you have to submit, because you got a debrief here, and on this factor, you had some weaknesses, where in this factor, you had some great strengths. So next time you can do a better job on this particular factor that you did poorly on this solicitation. You can make it better on your next time around and maybe be the successful offer as a result. Okay. So we kind of went in chronological sequence here. We started out with you being able to submit questions called PPIs. The contracting officer acknowledged that they needed to make a correction, and that is an amendment to the solicitation, making the change. Then the contracting officer is doing the evaluation. They made an award. You asked for a debrief, and now the contract has already been awarded. You were the successful offerer. You won the contract, and now there needs to be a change to the contract, either as a result of you identifying something, or the government's contracting officer says, hey, I need to add a new clause, or I need more quantity, or I need to change the location. Whatever it takes, it's a change to the terms and conditions, the statement of work on the contract. So that's a negotiated change. It's a back and forth between you and the government to come to a fair and reasonable price. And then the contracting officer issues a modification. Modifications are to contracts. Amendments are changes to solicitations. Okay. I've added 2 more terms here at the bottom. uh, design build and design bid build. And this is for those of you out there who are in the construction industry, construction contractors. So construction solicitations and follow-on contracts are typically two kinds. Design build is where the agency awards a contract to one company to design the building and then also build it. That's design build. So my agency, when I left in 2018, over the prior 10 years, we were shifting from DBB, which is the second one here, design bid build, to design build. And the reason for that is we could get the end product quicker if we issued a solicitation, had one contractor design it for us and construct it for us. You can see where that can be a shorter period of time. Also, the other advantage for the government is that if there is an issue during the construction phase, the construction contractor doesn't come back to the government and say, hey, your design, your diagrams and your design is screwed up. It's wrong. Well, the government's going to come back to the contractor and say, you designed it. You go talk to your architect engineering firm. It's design build. It's on you. You go fix it. Okay. As opposed to a design bid build, the federal government goes out to an architect engineering firm, gets them to design what the government wants. The government receives it, accepts it. And then when they get enough money to go into the construction phase and have it built, then they put that design in a solicitation and say, okay, all you construction contractors, give me your proposal for the construction to this design. Okay, so that's design, bid, build. In this case, go into the construction solicitation, the contractors submit their proposal for doing the construction for the design that was given to them by the government. And one of them wins the award for the construction. During the construction phase, a problem comes up with the design. It goes back to the government because the government provided the design to the construction contractor. Okay, so now the onus is on the government to fix that flaw in the design and give it to the contractor. And the contractor then gets an opportunity to say, oh, wait a minute, this change is going to cost more money, or it's going to cost more time, or it's going to cost both time and money. I need a modification to the contract. Okay, so that's the difference between design build and design bid build. And that only pertains to construction. Okay, next question. Excuse me, next slide.
Sorry.
Question? Yeah, here, statement of work. Okay, so these are all solicitation terms. SOW, PWS, they are all the same thing, different terms for the same thing. It's a statement of work. PWS is a performance work statement. So different agencies will call them different things, but they're all the same thing. It is a description of what the government wants. Okay, statement of work, performance work statement. Next is fee, GFM, and GFP. The difference between those is the last letter, E, M, and P. Government furnished equipment, government furnished material, government furnished property, and there's a couple other government furnished things also. This is really important to know when you are reviewing a solicitation and considering whether to compete for the award or not, is know if there is any government furnished anything in that solicitation, which will be in the follow-on contract, that the government is going to provide to you. Because if you miss that and you put the price in your proposal to charge the government for it, your price is going to be high compared to your competitors. So you always want to know if there's anything that's government furnished. Like utilities is very common. Is the government going to provide the water, the electricity, the natural gas? Yeah. A great example of a very expensive government furnished property is out at the Naval Submarine Base, where I worked for many years. There is a locomotive that is required to transport munitions from on base to goes down to Shelton, Washington and on out. They call it the white train. And in the base operations support services contract, there is a requirement in that statement of work in the contract to maintain the locomotive and to use it to drive the freight train cars from one location to another. Well, if the government didn't provide its locomotive to the contractor to use, can you imagine how much that price would be for that contract? It would shoot up millions of dollars to have a locomotive. And you're not going to go buy one, you're going to go lease one. Very expensive. And the government knows this, and the government owns one. So it is government furnished property, and it will be identified in the solicitation and provided in the contract. So the government provides it, and the contractor is going to use it to fulfill the requirements of the statement of work. Standard form, SF. These are forms at the Federal Acquisition Regulation level. FAR. These are FAR forms you find in the FAR Part 53 that are utilized by all federal agencies. Okay. The next level down is each department within the federal executive branch, for which there are 15 departments in the federal branch of the executive branch of the federal government, have their forms also. So the example that I have here is a DD form. That is a Department of Defense form. Okay, and so every agency will have its own forms also. So the next two are pricing terms, CLIN and SLINs. So every time that you put a price proposal or a quote together, you're typically going to have at least one CLIN. And that's where the federal agency is asking you, what is your price for this statement of work? I want you to build a building. I'm providing you the design. Tell me how much you will charge to build this building. That's the CLIN. Now, the agency may also want you to break down your price in that CLIN in SLINs. So those are subline item numbers that roll up into the total value for that CLIN. So if you're going to build that building for $2 million and it's design build, then the agency might want to know, okay, I want two SLINs. I want to know how much you're charging for the design and how much are you charging for the construction. So those are two SLINs, design and the construction, that when added together equal the value of the CLIN. Okay, so it's just a further breakdown of the CLIN. So every solicitation will have at least one CLIN. That's a contract line item number, and they may have more. It just depends on the scope, complexity of the requirement. I mean, I've seen solicitations that have 50 CLINs in them, and there might be 50 for each year. On a 5-year contract, that's 5 times 50, that's 250 CLINs that you got a price. And in some of them had SLINs. So, it's quite an effort to put a price proposal together on those big contracts. Okay. Moving on from solicitation terms to federal keyword and terms. Okay, so this is just in general. We were talking earlier about the FAR, that's the Federal Acquisition Regulation. That is, regulations are same force and effect as law. So you want to be mindful that when a contract cites a FAR clause, that is law. You violate that, you can go to prison, get fined, whatever. Okay. Now, also, the departments within the executive branch have supplements to the FAR. Here is an example, the DFARS. This is the Department of Defense Federal Acquisition Regulations Supplement. It has the same force and effect as law. So you have to make sure that you are always in compliance with FAR clauses and DFARS clauses and each of the other 14 departments of the executive branch of the federal government. Department of Defense is a large department, and it is a good example of sub-agencies. So within the Department of Defense, you have the Army, the Air Force, the Navy, the Marine Corps, the Defense Logistics Agency, Defense Health Services, lots of sub-agencies. They also publish their supplements too. Here's an example. The Army is the AFARS. The Air Force is the FFARS. And the Navy and Marine Corps are combined into the NMCARS. Now, these are supplements. They are not of the same force and effect as law. These are supplements to each of those sub-agencies, providing guidance, procedures, and policy of how to do performance. They are not law. They are instructions. Okay. May see POP is the period of performance. What's the duration of the contract? That's the period of performance. PCO and ACO. PCO is a procuring contracting officer. So that is the effort of the contracting officer in the agency, everything leading up to and including the award of the contract. Everything else after the award of contract is handled by the ACO, the administrative contracting officer. Most agencies, they are two different offices. So for example, under the Department of Defense, almost like 99% of the procuring offices, the PCO, it awards the contract and then they download it to another agency like DCMAO, Defense Contract Management Area Office, to administer it. I worked in an agency where we administered the contracts that we awarded. We are an exception to the rule. We're like the 1%, where we award a contract and we administer the contract. And typically that's called cradle to grave. You won't find that in here, but it's called cradle to grave. It's the very first step of, oh, I got an idea for a contract that we need a contractor to perform, to going through all the process, awarding a contract, administering the contract, paying the invoices, doing the contractor's performance evaluation, and closing out the contract. The full spectrum of award and administering a contract, cradle to grave. That's where the term comes from cradle to grave. Okay. So next we have some terms that contractors continuously use synonymously, thinking they're the same. Task order and delivery order, they are not the same. A task order is on a service contract. They issue a task order for you to perform a service. That is a task order. A delivery order typically is on a supply contract, where they issue a delivery order for you to deliver a supply, a widget, a mop, a broom. That's the delivery. They want you to deliver a product. Where on a service contract, you are performing a service. So that is a task. That's the difference between a task order and a delivery order. Okay. Last, contractor, abbreviations can be different. You can see KR and you can see KTR. It's contractor. Now, two more that I didn't put on here that I will in my next class when I offer this is KO and CO. KO is contracting officer. CO is contracting officer. So it depends on the agency that you are working with, whether they use the abbreviation CO or KO. So CO, contracting officer, the abbreviation, the first letters are CO. And so all the agencies, except for the Navy, uses CO. The reason why the Navy doesn't use CO and they use KO instead is because the person in charge of that Navy installation is a commanding officer, CO. And so we don't want that confusion. Oh, the CO said, you got to do this. CO, that commanding officer or contracting officer? So the Navy uses KO. K for contract, KR for contractor, and KO for contracting officer. So little nuance there. You work with Navy, now you'll know it's KO for contracting officer. Okay. Next page is we're getting into indirect and direct cost terms. I put a red asterisk here. Wherever you see that, I think there's one other page. I don't know if we already went past it or yet to come. That red asterisk means that there is another class dedicated to just that subject. We have a class on direct and indirect costs. So if you're interested in developing your indirect costs, a lot of small businesses, it just goes over their head, don't understand how to compute an indirect cost, don't know what costs should be included in it, what costs can't be included in it. Some costs can, some costs can't. There's another class dedicated just to indirect costs and how to compute it. All right, so direct costs, indirect costs, and B&O taxes can be indirect or direct. So let's starting from the top, direct costs. Your direct cost is labor, materials, and equipment. What is it going to take to do the job? Those are your direct costs, labor, materials, and equipment. Okay. Indirect costs are those, and so indirect costs, there can be different names for it, but they all mean the same thing. Home office overhead, general and administrative costs, indirect costs. All three of those are the same thing. Different people use any of those three terms. It's all the same thing. Okay. Now, if you're in construction, though, you have typically an additional overhead cost, which is called field office overhead. So you will have home office overhead and field office overhead. Field office are those costs associated for example, putting a office trailer on the construction site and all the overhead costs associated with that field office trailer on site. And at the same time, you're still going to have your home office cost is your corporate office costs, for the president and the vice president and the secretary and the fax machine and the telephone and paying the utilities and the lease of the building. That's all corporate home office overhead, or some companies call it general administrative costs. So some companies have one overhead cost where their home office and their G&A is all one. Other companies will separate those. They'll have a G&A cost and a home office cost. Either is fine. You just need to be consistent with the way you do it. Okay. Indirect costs. Lastly, because we are in one of 8 states in the United States that levies a B&O tax, business and occupation tax. So if you're doing work in the state of Washington, you need to be aware that you've got to pay B&O tax to the state of Washington. Also be aware that there are 36 cities in the state of Washington that also follow pursuit of the state, and they also levy a B&O tax. So here locally, I can give you a great example is in Bremerton, Washington, the Puget Sound Naval Shipyard is in Bremerton. So if you win a contract or work in the shipyard, not only are you paying the state of Washington a B&O tax, you are also paying the city of Bremerton a B&O tax. Contrary, just 8 miles north of Bremerton is the community called Silverdale, and just north of it is the Naval Submarine Base. It is not in an incorporated area. Silverdale is not incorporated. It's not a city. It's part of the county. It just happens to be a large community, but it's not a city. And so if you got an award of a contract to perform work on the Naval Submarine Base, you only pay B&O tax to the state of Washington. You don't pay any B&O tax to the city of Silverdale because it's really not a city. It's not incorporated. Okay. So when you put your price proposal together during the solicitation phase to get the award of a contract, you make sure that you know all the taxes that you're going to be paying, because you want to put that in your price proposal so you get compensated for it. It's a cost of doing business, and so you can get paid for that in this case, say it was a federal agency, they award you a contract, and in your price proposal, based on your price, you figured out that the B&O tax for the state of Washington is 0.00484% of the bottom line total value of your contract. You got to pay the state of Washington. Okay, that is the rate. 0.00484 is the Washington state B&O tax rate for federal contracts. Okay. Now, what we're talking about here, though, can it be an indirect cost or a direct cost? It depends on your business. It can be either way. You do want it covered somewhere in your direct costs or your indirect costs, because you're going to have to pay it. So it just depends on the nature of your business and the volume of your federal contracts that you have. So some companies will put that B&O tax in their indirect costs, because the majority of their contracts, whether it's prime or subcontractor, are federal. So they're paying it for the majority of their income. So they put it in their indirect costs. Now, if you're just starting out in government contracting and you are successful and you win a contract from a federal agency this year, but 90% of your business is still commercial and private industry, well, when you put that price proposal together, you probably want to make that B&O tax a direct cost. You're going to put it on the bottom of your price proposal. You're going to add up your direct costs, your profit, your overhead, and then you sum it all up, and then you're going to add B&O tax to the bottom, because B&O is paid on the total value of the contract, in this case, your price proposal. Okay. And so then in that case, it becomes a direct cost. You're putting this B&O tax for this specific contract. If you should win it, that's the value of your B&O tax, and you're treating it as a direct cost. So it can be either way. It just depends on the nature and the volume of your business with federal contracting. Okay. Do we want to take a break here? Any questions up to this point? Or you want to save them?
There are a couple questions / comment in the chat.
Okay. You want to read them to me?
Sure. It's from Leslie Coffey, and she says, while assessing a failed bid, would your reviewer tell you if they've awarded a contract to another company given a prior relationship, or are they only supposed to tell you about why your bid failed, or both?
All right. So a couple of different things in there. On the federal side, a contracting officer puts in the solicitation the evaluation factors. And that is typically in the uniform contract format, or like a service contract. It is in section AL. In L is the evaluation factors. And M says how they're going to evaluate those factors that they put in L. So when the contracting officer receives the proposals, the only evaluation that takes place is what they put in the solicitation in section L. These are the factors. And in section M, it will say how we're going to evaluate those factors that we identified in L. You will never see a factor, what was your relationship with the federal agency? Okay, that is not a factor. And if you, after award, you catch wind that the contracting officer showed favoritism to, like, the incumbent or another contractor because of their relationship, you can file a protest and you will win. Okay, because in the federal government, it's transparent. There's standardization of evaluations of proposals. They are the evaluation factors are identified in the solicitation, and how they are going to be evaluated is in the solicitation. They cannot vary from that. Okay, so that's addressing that part of the question. The other part is you were the unsuccessful offerer. What was the last part of that question?
that they were asking, if they would be told that it was given to a prior relationship, or do they only tell you why your bid failed?
All right. So there are various types of solicitations. There's low price technically acceptable, and best value trade-off. So typically what we're talking about is best value trade-off, where there is an evaluation and there's a rating range for every evaluation factor in technical proposal. It's usually on a scale of 5. The middle is satisfactory. There's 2 below and 2 above. So just because you weren't the awardee doesn't mean you had a bad proposal. I mean, you could have been evaluated satisfactory or above satisfactory, but the successful offer was rated outstanding. So you're a good contractor. You were evaluated satisfactory or even better, but it wasn't the best proposal. And then you take that in combination with your price proposal. Maybe your price may have been lower, but your technical proposal was not as good as the successful offer, who they were willing to pay a little bit more. That's best value trade-off. That is the scenario where the government is willing to pay more to get a better contractor. You may have had a lower price, but you weren't technically the better contractor. And the government, in issuing that solicitation as a best value trade-off and evaluation factors, were willing to pay more to get a better contractor. Now, my agency, before I retired, for probably 5 to 10 years, we saw the trend from our clients that they were not willing to pay more. They wanted the best price to get at least a satisfactory product. And so we changed from best value trade-off to low price technically acceptable. So that's kind of a 2-step process in the evaluation. So we evaluate the technical proposals, either pass fail or what was the term? Acceptable and unacceptable. So all those that were technically evaluated as unacceptable, they're set aside. And all those that are evaluated as acceptable, then it goes into the price evaluation. Now, who is the lowest price? Because these are all acceptable. Now we just want to know who's the lowest price, and that's who gets the award of the contract. Okay. So just because you didn't win the contract doesn't necessarily mean that you got a unsatisfactory performance evaluation. You may be a good contractor. It's just that there was a better one. It all depends on what the solicitation says, how they're going to evaluate and make the award. Is it an LPTA, low price technically acceptable, or is it a best value trade-off, BVTO? So you got to read your solicitations to make sure they're a good fit and that you understand the process going into the competition for the award of the contract. Did I answer the question?
I think so. So, Terry, we have another question here from Bridget. She says that she thought the federal government doesn't pay tax, so she's just a bit confused on the B&O taxes. So, Terry?
Yeah, so the government does pay B&O taxes. That is a cost of doing business. That is a tax that you have to pay the state, you have to pay the cities, and in some counties, you got to pay the county B&O tax. And recall that there are only 8 states in the United States that have a B&O tax. So if you are competing for work in other states, check the B&O tax. Does that state charge a B&O tax? Do they have cities in the state that charge a B&O tax? Counties in the state that charge a B&O tax? So the scenario that I put out to my clients is you're putting a price proposal together. The 4 components of a price proposal, especially for us in the state of Washington, is direct costs, indirect costs, profit, and B&O tax. So your direct cost is labor, materials, and equipment. Your indirect cost is your overhead, G&A, home office overhead, whatever you want to call it. Different rates, combined rates, like I said, however you do it, and profit, and then B&O tax. Okay, so you put your price proposal together, you got your direct costs in there, you know what your indirect cost is, you included that in your price proposal, and then we call the profit the greed factor. How much money do you want to make on this? There's lots of, there's a whole nother class on cost proposal preparation. It's later this year. But there's a whole in-depth section on profit, how to determine what the profit rate I should put in this and win the contract. So there's all kinds of variables and reasons for determining a 2% profit, a 5% profit, a 10%, or 150% profit. Okay, the greed factor. And then there's the B&O tax. Okay, so if you put your proposal together, you got your direct costs, your indirect costs, and you've got a factor in there for profit, but you left out the B&O tax because it was in another state and you didn't know they had it, or you're in the state of Washington, there's requirements in the state of Washington, and you just didn't know what B&O tax was, and you left it out. Okay, so right there, your price is going to be a little bit lower than your competitors, and you won the contract. Okay, day one, the tax collector from the state of Washington comes knocking on your door and say, hey, I just found out that you won a $3.5 million contract. You now owe us 0.00484% of your bottom line price of your contract. Pay up. Oh my God, I didn't include that in my price. So because you didn't include it in your price doesn't mean you're not paying. You're going to pay the tax man one way or another. Okay, so what happens in this scenario? 0.00484% is got to come from somewhere. Where's it coming from? It's coming from profit. Okay, you got your direct costs. Okay, now another worst case scenario is a lot of small businesses don't know how to compute their overhead costs, the indirect costs, or the G&A, whatever you want to call it, all the same thing. Okay, I help companies develop their indirect rate and create it. It turns out to be 13.2% or 9.7% or 18.3%. Anyway, they know what it is, and now they can put it in their price proposals. But for those companies who put a cost proposal together and just put the direct cost and their profit, and that's what they submit, they win the contract. And I tell them, as soon as you win the contract and you start performing, you're losing money. You got nothing in your price proposal for paying for your expenses for your corporate office. That lease that you're paying every month, or the rent you're paying for that office space, for all the utilities, for the fax machine, the computer, the office supplies, the toner, the secretary, your office car, you, the owner. You didn't include any of that in your proposal. Okay, so you won the contract, you're losing money on the first day. So if you didn't put indirect cost in your price proposal, where's that cost? How are you paying for all those expenses? It's coming from profit. Okay, so you put in a 10% profit. Now your B&O tax got to come out of there. Now it just dropped to 9%, and now your indirect rate is really 11 point some percent. So now 9 minus 11 minus 2%. You're losing money on day one of your contract. Okay, well, we got a whole nother class that goes into depth on how to prepare a cost proposal. Okay.
So Terry, just another really quick question here from Deb. She wants to know if there's any way to apply as a woman-owned business or EDWSB when they are still waiting for the certification process to be complete. Any way to apply it, or submit a bid. Yeah.
It's pending. It's pending.
Yeah.
Well, you don't know if you're going to get that certification approved. So I don't know, that is, well, certainly you're not going to respond to a source of SOT as a woman-owned small business because you don't have that certification. You can respond to the source of SOT as a small business, okay, because that's a self-certification. You determined that yourself. You've identified your NAICS code. You went out to the Small Business Administration website and found out the size standard for that NAICS code, and you are less than that. So you self-certify that you're a small business. So you can still compete as a small business, but you really can't compete as a woman-owned small business because the Small Business Administration has not approved your application for that certification yet. Now you can still submit a proposal and identify that you are a woman-owned small business, but the only entity that benefits from that is the government. If the government happens to award you the contract as a woman-owned small business, they take credit for that. That helps them meet their socioeconomic goal for the year. Their goal for women-owned small business, I think this year is 3%. So 3% of all the dollars that they award needs to go to women-owned small business. So they get credit for that. Okay. But as far as you being able to, if a solicitation comes out and it says 100% set aside, and they check the box, woman-owned small business, and you don't have your certification yet, really, you should not be wasting your time competing for the award of that contract. You don't know how long the SBA is going to take to process your certification, and you don't even know if you're going to get that certification. There may be hiccups with it. Okay, so woman-owned small business and veteran-owned small business certifications have been fraught with fraud for decades, and now the SBA is clamping down on that. So here's a good example. Before the pandemic in 2019, when we were doing our contract coffee hour in person in Silverdale, Washington, a husband and wife came in. He recently retired from the shipyard as a supervisor welder. He was a welder, and now he's retired. He started up a welding business, and he was contemplating making it a women-owned small business. Okay, so he was talking to us about it, and so we played the devil's advocate, and we asked the question, okay, Mrs. Welder, do you do TIG welds or arc welds, gas welds? What kind of welding do you do? Oh, I don't do welding. I'm just gonna be the owner of the company, and I'm gonna process the checks and pay the bills and whatnot. Wrong. The SBA will not give you a woman-owned small business certification if you are not a welder. Okay, so they are clamping down on that, and there are going to be fewer women-owned small business certifications. So getting back to the question, if you don't have your certification in hand, you should not be competing for those solicitations that are set aside to a particular socioeconomic certification. Okay, did I answer your question? Not the way you wanted to hear, though. Any more questions before we move on? The next slide is short. Department of Defense agencies. Okay, there we go. DCAA, DCMAO, and DFAS. Okay, DCAA is the Defense Contract Audit Agency. And that is the Department of Defense agency that audits contractors. There are dollar thresholds depending on the type of contract. For example, I think any firm fixed price contract that exceeds $1 million is going to be audited when that contract completes. All cost type contracts will be audited. So it depends on the type of contract and the dollar value of the contract, but that's the agency that does the audits for the Department of Defense. The next one is the Defense Contract Management Area Office. I mentioned this before. All but a particular systems command within the Navy downloads the administration of their contract to DCMAO. So say the Air Force. The Air Force awards a contract, and then they turn the contract administration over to DCMAO. So there's two entities. One is the PCO, the Procuring Contracting Office, and then the ACO, and the ACO is performed by DCMAO, Defense Contract Management Area Office. Next is the paying office. Certainly you're interested in getting paid for the services that you perform for the federal government. In the Department of Defense, it is DFAS, Defense Finance and Accounting Service. That's the agency that pays the invoices. Now, every department within the executive branch of the federal government, for which I mentioned before, there are 15 departments. Every department has its own process and procedure for processing invoices. The Department of Defense uses WAF, Wide Area Workflow, WAWF. Department of Energy has its own. Department of Interior has its own. They all have their own. It's not WAF for everybody. WAF is only Department of Defense. Okay. So just be aware that for every department that you get a contract with, you're going to be submitting your invoice to a different internet website. Hopefully they're all using the internet for paying invoices instead of having to submit a paper by the mail or email. Okay. All right. Next page, contract types. There are many, many contract types. They are all identified in the Federal Acquisition Regulation, Part 16. This comes right out of the FAR, Part 16, the categories of contracts. Fixed price, cost reimbursement, incentive, indefinite delivery. You may have heard IDIQ. That's indefinite delivery, indefinite quantity. The reason why an agency issues an IDIQ contract is because over a period of time, they don't know how much they're going to buy. And the IQ is indefinite delivery. They don't know when they're going to want it. So they award a basic contract called an indefinite delivery, indefinite quantity contract. And then over the life of the contract, they will issue task orders. If it's a service contract, they will issue task orders. Remember on previous slide, task orders for service contracts, delivery orders for supply contracts. So if this is a service contract and it's a 5-year contract, they will issue task orders throughout the life of that 5-year contract that you will perform each task order. And typically when you complete that, then you submit an invoice and get paid for it. So that is an indefinite delivery. They dare I say always? Let me say always. They will always have a not to exceed amount. So they may issue an IDIQ contract and the not to exceed amount is $50 million, $500 million. So what that means is they can issue task orders after task orders after task orders after task orders, but the accumulation of all of those cannot exceed that not to exceed amount. Okay. There's time and materials contracts, there's labor hour contracts, there's letter contracts, and then there's a whole category of agreements like BOAs, basic ordering agreements. So within each one of these are other types of contracts like fixed price. There's firm fixed price. There's firm fixed price with award fee, firm fixed price with incentive fee. There's all kinds of them. Okay. And that doesn't mean that if the contract type is not identified in FAR Part 16, that an agency can't come up with a hybrid, something different. My agency that I retired from, we came up with hybrids. So there's even more contract types out there than what's identified in FAR Part 16. Site visits, pre-proposal conference, and pre-bid conference. So a site visit is typically associated with a construction requirement where you are invited to come out to the site during the solicitation phase and see what you're getting into. Take a look at the building, take a look at the grounds, the water, where are the utilities coming from? Where's your laydown area? Where can you put your supplies and materials in order to perform the contract? Where's the parking lot for your employees when they come to work? Okay, that's the purpose of a site visit. Pre-proposal conference. This is the name of a conference that can be held during the solicitation phase. So an example would be if I issued a solicitation, let's say for a construction project, I will typically offer that site visit and pre-proposal conference on the same day, and typically about 10 to 15 days, about 10 days after I issued the solicitation. An invitation for you to come out. The pre-proposal conference is a review of the solicitation, the terms and conditions, the statement of work, of what it is. We'll call out any unusual, peculiar requirements that are in there to just bring it to your attention to make sure you understand it, give you an opportunity to ask questions. And then there's typically a site visit where you can actually go out on the site and take a look at it also. So that's the site visit. If it's not construction, it might just be a pre-proposal conference. It's an opportunity for you to attend and hear from the government's representative, typically the contracting officer, going through the solicitation, highlighting the important or unusual things that are in the solicitation, just to make sure that you've been called out, your attention's been called out to it, make sure that you include it in your proposal. Okay. And then there's the pre-bid conference. So that is associated with sealed bid procurements, which come under FAR Part 14. Those are pre-bid conferences. The same thing happens. You attend the meeting, they go through the solicitation, identify the unusual, peculiar, important things in the solicitation. One just happens to be a sealed bid procedure, where the other is a negotiated procurement. So pre-proposal conference versus a pre-bid conference. Okay. So pre-proposal conference, you would submit a proposal. It's a request for proposal. You're submitting a proposal. In a pre-bid conference, that's sealed bid. So it's an invitation for bid solicitation. They're issuing an IFB, invitation for bid, and you are submitting a bid to receive the award of the contract. Okay. Moving on, award terms. How are we doing for time? 4:20. We've got a ways to go here. Okay. Post-award terms. So we've already gone through general contracting terms and pre-award terms. Now these are the terms that you would find after the contract has been awarded. So there's the pre-performance conference and the pre-construction conference. So normally 10, 15 days after the award of the contract, the contracting officer will convene a pre-performance conference for a service contract or a pre-construction conference for a construction contract. And they gather all the people that are involved in this, the prime contractor, the subcontractors, the contracting officer's representative, or the client. I mean, it could be 40 people in a room, lots of people, all the stakeholders in here. Okay. The PAC is a post-award kickoff meeting, which is a meeting for a design build construction project. So the architect engineer company is there, the construction company is there, and the cast of thousands of other people are there. CCD, contract completion date. That is the end date when this contract needs to be completed by. UCA is an undefinitized contract action. That's when typically something is urgent and compelling, and we don't have time to issue a modification to a contract. So we're going to issue an undefinitized contract action. We may put some money on it, tell you the change, and you need to go out and start doing it. During that performance of that change, you get the opportunity to submit a proposal. Contracting officer evaluates that, enter into discussions, determine a fair and reasonable price, and the contracting officer then issues a modification. Remember the difference between an amendment and a modification. Modifications come after award. So the contracting officer issues a modification for that change, giving you more time or more money or both for that changed condition. An unauthorized commitment is a UC, and I have a lot of experience in this. Typically, we see a lot of this overseas, but we also see it in the United States, is where somebody on the government side, not the contracting officer, has a conversation with the contractor. And as a result of that conversation, the contractor does something that's not in the scope of the contract. And then when they finish it, the contractor submits an invoice to the contracting officer to get paid for it. And the contracting officer says, what the heck is this? I didn't tell you to do this. That is an unauthorized commitment. You did something as a result of talking to somebody on the government side, but you didn't talk to me. I'm the contracting officer. I am the only one that can authorize you to perform a change to the contract. Okay. Whole nother process. Now that I have received an invoice from you, I've got to treat this as an unauthorized commitment because I didn't tell you to do it. Okay. And nobody else has the authority. Only the contracting officer has the authority. Okay. Then we got T for C and T for D. Termination for convenience is when the government needs to terminate a contract. Got nothing to do, no fault on your part. The government is initiating this for whatever reason. There can be a multitude of reasons why the government needs to terminate this contract. Okay, for convenience. Termination for default is on you. You have done something wrong, and they are terminating your contract. Termination for default. And what goes with that is if the government still needs that requirement, they're going to do a follow-on contract, and all the re-procurement costs you have to pay for because your contract was terminated for default because of something you did wrong. But the government still needs the contract to be completed, and now they got to go out and issue a new solicitation, go through evaluations, award a contract to another company. That's expensive, and all those costs, the terminated contractor is going to pay for it. Okay. Next slide. Post-award terms, continuation, not NTPs, notice to proceed. So typically, that's associated with construction contracts. A construction contract is awarded. During the first 10, 15 days, the construction contractor is to submit many documents. Once they are reviewed and accepted by the contracting officer, then you get a notice to proceed with construction. Doesn't always happen that way, but that's what a notice to proceed is. Just because you're awarded the contract doesn't mean you can start work. The contract will say you can start work once the contracting officer gives you a NTP, a notice to proceed. REA versus the claim, the second and the third one on the list. REA is a request for equitable adjustment. A claim is a claim. An REA is different than a claim. An REA, you are working with the contracting officer to resolve a change in the contract. You are in a partnership relationship, a request for equitable adjustment. A claim is in an adversarial relationship. You are not happy with the direction that the contracting officer is giving you. You are in disagreement. You cannot come to a fair and reasonable price for the change, and therefore you are now going to get the lawyer involved, pay for that expense, put a claim together, submit it to the contracting officer, and it's time. It's more money because the lawyer's involved now, and more time to get this resolved. And it's because you and the contracting officer could not come to an agreement. Okay, so it's adversarial now. It can end up in the courts. And lastly is last two items is CPARS and FAPIS. CPARS, Contractor Performance Assessment Reporting System. That is the initial process for your evaluation of how well or how poorly you performed on your contract. So the government initiates it in CPARS, sends it to you for your review comments, goes back to the contracting officer. They may make changes to the evaluation because of what you said, or they may stand firm. Nope, I agree with my original assessment. I disagree with your rebuttal. And then it goes final, and it goes then into FAPIS. FAPIS is a federal awardee performance and integrity information system. That is up on the internet. It is up there for 5 years for all federal agencies to see. So part of the evaluation of a proposal is checking contractors' past performance. That is a requirement by the federal acquisition regulations. Every contracting officer has to check on your past performance. So what I tell my attendees in my other classes is once you've been awarded the contract, it is not done. Okay. Now it's just like in private industry, it's all about customer satisfaction. You want to provide a quality product and you want to do it on time. Because otherwise you can get a less than satisfactory performance evaluation and it will haunt you for 5 years and be difficult for you to get a follow-on contract or a contract with any other federal agency. Okay. We ready for the next slide, or do we have a question or two? You're on mute.
Yeah, we did have a quick question about who determines the contract type category, within the agency.
Yeah, that's normally done through a contract review board with a contracting officer, the upper management, as to what type of contract is contemplated to be awarded. And as a result, then that goes into the solicitation. Solicitation is issued. All the interested parties compete for the award of the contract, and the contract is awarded with that type of contract, a fixed price, a cost type, a letter contract, incentive contract, an IDIQ contract. That is all determined many months before that solicitation is issued, but it's the government that determines the contract type. Any other questions?
Nope, that's it. Thank you.
All right. So the next couple of pages, 2 of them, in fact, is certifications. So this is a high-level review of socioeconomic certifications. And this is the other slide that has the red asterisk there. There is another class dedicated to just socioeconomic certifications. So this is a high-level review identifying the federal government's socioeconomic certifications. These are different than the state. Realize that if you've got federal socioeconomic certifications, they are not accepted by the state. And if you got state certifications, they are not accepted by the federal government. Okay, so we're going to talk about all the different certifications for the federal government. The first one is small business. As I mentioned before in the class, this is a self-certification. You identify your NAICS codes, you go out to the SBA website, determine what the size standard is for that. And if you are less than that, then you're a small business and you just self-certify that you're a small business. The next one was created last year. It's the small disadvantaged business. This is something that the current administration has pushed, and we have another certification now. It's SDB, and it is also a self-certification. You go out to the Small Business Administration website, you look at the criteria. If you meet the criteria, then you can identify yourself as a small disadvantaged business. Now, the rest of these are all certifications that you have to formally submit an application to the Small Business Administration. They review it, may interview you, and eventually, if all things go well, you get that certification. So the first one I have here is veteran-owned small business, which is a self-certification. The next one is service-disabled veteran-owned small business, which is an actual certification. You need to submit an application now to the SBA. Last year, it was the Veterans Administration. It has now transferred to the SBA as of January 9th this year. They started receiving applications. We're in a transition period. 2023 is the first year that the SBA is issuing the certifications for SDVOSB. You can self-certify in 2023. You can still submit an application for the certification if you want. And the duration of that certification starting this year will be 4 years. But after this year, a certification is for 3 years. Okay. Next page. Okay, this is the rest of the federal socioeconomic certifications. Woman-owned small business. The next one is economically disadvantaged woman-owned small business. So the second one is a subset of the woman-owned small business. A question that I get from clients is, well, if I meet the requirements of economically disadvantaged women-owned small business, do I also have to apply for a woman-owned small business? The answer is no, because it is a subset. So you're both. If you get ED, WSB, you're automatically WOSB. Okay. I'm providing the websites there for you to click on and learn about what are the qualifications to get that certification as a woman-owned small business. The next one is Hub Zone. That's historically underutilized business zone. And those are geographic areas throughout the United States that are economically challenged, depressed, that the federal government has determined that we want our federal dollars to be awarded to companies in these hub zones to infuse some money into their economy to bolster them up. Okay. There are different ways geographic areas can become hub zones. One is Indian reservations. They are grandfathered. They will always be a hub zone. Others are based on the 10-year census. So we, as you recall, we just had a census completed December of 2020. I think it's July 1st of this year, the new hub zone map is coming out. I've already gotten a copy, a look ahead of what the new map is going to be. And what happens then every 10 years is these existing hub zones boundaries can morph. They can get bigger, change directions, get smaller, get bigger, or completely disappear, and new ones appear in the United States. So the advantage of this is if your company is located in a hub zone and at least 35% of your employees live in a hub zone, you may qualify to be certified as a hub zone small business. The last one is the SBA's 8A program. This is a 9-year program for socially and economically disadvantaged individuals. If you're interested in that, go to that same website, certified.sba.gov, and take a read on the requirements to qualify to get into that 9-year program. It's a great program. It's the only one that gives you an advantage of single source procurements. That's where an agency can issue a solicitation to only you. You eliminated your competition. They are going to issue a solicitation. You're going to put a proposal together, submit it to them. They're going to have discussions with you to come to a fair and reasonable price and award the contract to you. That is the only socioeconomic certification that has that benefit. The others do not have that. So that's a great benefit. It's a 9-year program to help develop new companies that have been in business for a couple of years, that at the end of 9 years, you're supposed to be able to have been developed and be able to compete with large business when you graduate. Okay. All right. We're into questions, true or false. Oh, starting backwards from number 6. This is interesting. We'll see how this goes. Oh, there's number 1 and number 6. Okay. All right. So you can turn off your microphones and just give me your answers, or put your answers in chat. The first one. So this is kind of a review of what we've covered today. The terms REA and claim can be used interchangeably. True or false? Don't all answer at the same time. Turn off your mic, just shout it out. True or false? See how well you listen to the class. All right, I'll tell you on this first one, it is false. They are not interchangeable. An REA is not a claim. The claim is not an REA. Remember, an REA, you are in a partnership with the contracting officer to resolve a change to the contract. A claim, you are in an adversarial relationship. You disagree with the contracting officer. They're not bending your way. You're going to hire the lawyers. You're going to go to court. You just don't like what the contracting officer is doing. That's a claim. Okay. Question number 2. Is this going to work? Oh, there. Question number 2. A modification and amendment are the same thing. Remember, we talked about this. A modification and amendment. True or false? False. I got one false. I got 2 false. We got 18 people attending here. There's another false. Okay, so we're on the right track here. A modification and amendment are not the same thing. There's another false. Very good. And the reason for that is an amendment is a change to a solicitation. A modification is a change to a contract. So one is before award and one is after award. Question number 3. You should always ask for a post-award debrief, whether you win or lose a contract. True or false? Let's see your answers. Pop them up there. True, true. And here's some more. Come on. There's 18 of you out there.
Yes, I've been saying that and I raised my hand.
It's true. Okay. All right. Should you always ask for a post-award debrief, whether you win or lose a contract? The answer is true. Remember that you can learn how the agency evaluated your proposal and help you prepare and do a better job next time when you compete. Okay. So they're going to identify your weaknesses and your strengths in your proposal. Okay. Question number 4. A contract, a task order, and a delivery order are the same thing. I want to see your answers pop up in chat. True or false? A task order, a delivery order, and a contract are the same thing. I'm not getting any answers on this one. It's not hard. Come on. There's a false, a false, a false. Got 3 answers. Okay, that's enough. There's another false. The answer is false. A contract and a task order and delivery order are not the same thing. A delivery order is an order issued against a supply contract. You are to deliver a widget, deliver a supply item. A task order is an order issued on a service contract for you to perform a task. Okay, thus a task order. There's your difference. So task order and delivery order are vehicles for the government to order something on a basic contract, like we talked before, an IDIQ contract, indefinite delivery, indefinite quantity. They are orders placed against an IDIQ basic contract. And that's the contract, the basic contract. So contract, task order, and delivery order. Okay. Number 5, your contractor performance evaluation is initiated in CPARS and posted in FAPIS. True or false? True. I see one true. Another true. Another true. Another true. Okay, very good. The answer is true. So it's initiated in CPARS. The evaluation that's then sent to the contractor. Contractor gets an opportunity, I think it's 30 or 45 days to respond or rebut the comments in the evaluation and sent back to the contracting officer. Contracting officer has an opportunity to change what he wrote or say, nope, I agree with our assessment, and Mr. Contractor, you are wrong. And in your rebuttal, I do not accept. And then it goes up to FAPIS, and all federal agencies have access to it for 5 years. So as I've said before, after award, it's all about customer satisfaction. You want to do a great job. You want to get it done on time, provide a quality product, so on and so forth. Okay, because that evaluation will haunt you for 5 years. And just the opposite. You do a great job. They give you a performance evaluation that's greater than satisfactory. All the other agencies will see that. And if they're doing a procurement like the one you just did, and you got above satisfactory or outstanding, oh my gosh, you got a better opportunity to win that contract from that agency also. So evaluations can be good for you and they can be bad for you. All right. And number 6, to self-certify as a small business, you must check the size standard of your NAICS code. True or false? And here come the answers. There's a true. There's a true. There's a true. One more. Come on, one more. Any false? No more. Okay. To certify as a small business, you must check the size standard of your NAICS code. The answer is true. Remember, to determine if you're a small business, for every NAICS code that you identify is yours, you've got to go into the Small Business Administration's website and look up each one of those and see what the size standard is. Now, it's not uncommon for a company that has more than one NAICS code, and in this NAICS code, they're a small business, and the other NAICS code, they're a large business. Perfectly fine. It's just that in that industry, you're a large business, and in that industry, you're a small business. That's fine. not a problem. All right, moving right along. So the last part here is commonly asked questions. So these are questions that you may hear from a federal agency's contracting officer or small business liaison officer, or even a large business or a prime contractor that is seeking subcontractors, especially small businesses or small businesses with socioeconomic certifications. Are you in SAM? Do you have a UEI and a CAGE code? What is your primary NAICS code? Do you have a GSA contract? What contracting vehicles are you on? Like we talked about IDIQ contract. You know, you have some contracts with federal agencies. You have GSA contracts, or maybe you're a subcontractor on a GSA contract. Do you accept a purchase card? What do I mean by that? Do you accept Visa or MasterCard for payment of your invoice? Have you done work with us before? So prime contractor may be asking, have you ever worked for us before? And maybe he might be new to the company. He doesn't know that you did work for him last year or 5 years ago. Good question. The federal agency can ask the question, have you ever done work for us, the Department of Energy, before? Yeah, we did 2 jobs. We did one 2 years ago, and we did one 5 years ago. That's what they want to hear. Can you send me your capability statement or your line card? Line card is for supply companies. Capability statements is for everybody else. So if you don't have a capability statement, you need to get with your local PTAC to develop that capability statement, because it's very important that you get that nailed. I helped a client earlier. It took 3 drafts of a capability statement, but she got it on the 3rd one. It typically takes 4 or 5 drafts before you get a really good capability statement. This lady did it in 3. So I gave her 2 gold stars. Next, what are your bonding limitations? So this deals with construction. What are your bonding limitations? Companies, federal government always wants to know that, because if your bonding capability is low, well, then you're not going to be able to compete for a high dollar value contract. Okay. And do you have any federal certifications? Woman-owned small business, veteran-owned small business. You're an 8A company. You're a hub zone small business. Okay, that's what we mean by federal certifications. Okay. Any questions on commonly asked questions? Let's move on to the next slide. It's questions anyway. And so at the beginning of, before I actually kicked off the class, I asked you to jot down any other terms, words, acronyms, abbreviations that you have heard or seen in your experience that maybe I didn't cover here. Here's your opportunity to put it out there, and I will tell you the ins and outs about it. Or any questions on anything that we've covered here? Really? I did that great of a job?
Yeah. Oh, here it is.
Got a question?
Please comment on any bonding process or AR secured lines of credit recommendations or programs available for new set-aside entities.
Wow, that's a loaded question. All right. Bonding. I can't really help you a lot with that, because I was on the other side of the table as a contracting officer. When I receive proposals and evaluations, part of the solicitation is to identify your bonding capacity. We would say in the solicitation what the bonding requirements are, and then you had to read that and determine if you can meet that. If your bonding limit is that or higher, then you could compete for the award of the contract. If it's lower than that, there's no point in competing for the award of the contract. Yeah, you just got to work with the sureties and establish your bonding requirements. Your bonding capability will increase with successful construction contracts. You mentioned a term after bonding capacities. I think you said something like AR or ARC. I'm not familiar with that term. You want to limit expand on that question? You can turn off your mic and ask it. Unmute your mic. Okay.
Oh,
Yeah.
Jeff, are you there? Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry, it was question about secured lines of credit. Getting credit as a new entity, it's sometimes difficult. So that plays into another conversation of possibly joint a mentor protege or joint ventures. Can you comment on that just a little bit, maybe?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that is one solution to the problem. You come to the table as a construction contractor, for example, you've got years of experience, but you don't have the bonding capacity. And so that is a good way to solve the problem is go into a joint venture or a mentor protege, typically joint venture, because you're bringing in a partner that can infuse the money into the project and has bonding capability, where you, as a member of the joint venture, are the wrench turner, the construction guy that can push the dirt and put the concrete foundation in and put the walls up and the roof and paint and landscape and all of that. So that is a good way for new, young, small companies, construction companies, to be able to compete for award of bigger contracts is by going at it as a joint venture, bringing in a partner that helps you with that aspect of the competition is the bonding requirement. Okay. And that is a really good way to approach that. And after a few contracts under the joint venture, then your bonding capacity should be increased, and then you can compete for contracts on your own. Great question. In fact, in my 4 years as a counselor, I've not had that question before. So very good. All right. We'll have an opportunity for a couple more questions here. It's 4:50. We're running short. I only got a couple more pages. The next slide is my summary. Words matter for communication, so both parties understand each other. So that's what this class is all about, learning the lexicon of federal government contracting. Next slide, I'm providing you some resources for material that we covered today. Just going down the list, there's the web. So I've got the term or the abbreviation or whatnot and the website. So when you have the electronic copy of this, you can always go back to page 21 and say, oh, NAICS codes, where do I find my NAICS codes? You can just click on that. It's there for you, okay? And the SBI size standards, those go hand in hand. Debriefs, what can the federal government tell you in a debrief and what can they not tell you? I provided the website there for you. It's FAR part 15.506, okay? And REAs, where can you learn about REAs? It's FAR part 43.204. Okay, all right. Here I've provided a few of my upcoming classes. There's one in May, steps leading to a federal contract. June, ethics. A lot of people don't think there's ethics in contracting. Well, let me tell you, in federal contracting, there are ethics. There are lots of ethics requirements. And so I dedicated a class just to cover contract ethics, and that's on June 14th. Cybersecurity, a big deal in the Department of Defense. It is now becoming a big deal with GSA, and another agency I just learned about is already putting cybersecurity requirements in their solicitations and follow-on contracts. Soon, within a few years, all federal agencies are going to have cybersecurity requirements in their solicitations and follow-on contracts. It's not going away. Also heard last year that there are now states in the United States that are pursuing cybersecurity requirements in their solicitations and contracts. It's a big deal. Okay. Currently, DoD has two cybersecurity issues going on. One is CMMC, which are in a 5-year rollout to get the bugs worked out, the processes and procedures and whatnot. And that's is supposed to go into effect 1 October of 2025. It could be sooner, but the cybersecurity requirement that is in effect right now is the DoD interim rule, and that's been in effect for about 2 years. So you always want to check your solicitations and your follow-on contracts to make sure that whether those two clauses for the interim rule are in your contract or they are not. Socioeconomic certifications is coming up in July. That's going to be federal and state socioeconomic certifications. And I have a class, it's actually a workshop. It's a 2-day workshop on solicitation review. The first day we talk about reviewing solicitations. You get homework assignment. You actually get a solicitation, amendments, associated documents. You get in that class a solicitation review check sheet, which is 1.5 pages long. You get 3 documents. You get to take that home. You get to keep it for every future solicitation that you review, and use those 3 documents to help you do that review and make that determination of a go, no-go decision. Go meaning, yep, I'm going for the award of the contract, or no go, there's something about this solicitation that's not a good fit for me. I'm passing on it, going to look for another solicitation. Okay, so that workshop is in August. And someone said that that's a picture of me in that picture. Well, okay. Next slide. All right, so we have some monthly recurring sessions. We have a contract coffee hour, which is the first Wednesday of every month from 8 to 10 o'clock. Our next one is May 3rd. That's where contractors come in. We can talk about capability statements, your elevator pitch. It gives you an opportunity to bring questions into that coffee hour, and we discuss it. You meet other contractors. It's a network. It's a great event. And the other one is Wednesdays with the deputies for small business. We have organized this meeting every month for in our local area here in Puget Sound, or actually in Kitsap County. We have 5 local small business liaison officers from, let's see, most of them are Navy, but one is a Defense Logistics Agency. So they come in, and it's every the last Wednesday of every month from 10 to 11:30, and the next one is April 26th. The PTAC calendar link for upcoming events. You can click on that link, and it will tell you upcoming classes and events that are coming. They're in chronological sequence. If you see something of interest, just click on it. You can read a greater description of it and register. All the classes and events are free. Next slide is tomorrow. You will receive a post survey of my class here. It'll have 5 survey questions. I hope that you can take the time to answer those. They are a great benefit to me to improving the class for the next time I offer it. So please take a few moments, especially answer questions 1, 2, and 3. And lastly is, if you don't have a PTAC counselor, this is how you can get a counselor assigned to you. If you are in Kitsap County, contact James Davis, and there's his email address. And if you're in the state of Washington, not in Kitsap County, you can go to that website, washingtonptac.org, sign up to be a client, and a counselor will be assigned to you. And if you are outside of the state of Washington, the last link there is aptac.us.org, and find a PTAC counselor in your locality. That's my last slide. That's slide 26. We have the last opportunity to stump the chump. No, ask me any questions you want. Lexicon, federal terms in contracting. This is your last chance. Unless you sign up for a meeting with me and we have a one-on-one conversation and everything you want to know about federal contracting.
Okay, well, they seem like a pretty quiet group. I think probably most are ready to pack it up for the day. And I just want to thank Terry for his always awesome presentation. There's so much content. It's a little bit hard to digest, but with the handouts that you have and the links that he gave you, and you hang around PTACs long enough, you'll learn some of these through osmosis, if nothing else. But we appreciate everybody coming today. And with that, we will call it a day. So
Okay.
thank you so much.
Hope you found it beneficial.
Thank you.